Welcome back, everybody. It's Ted Gover here. Our guest today is Casey Tanaka. Mr. Tanaka is a former mayor and current council member of the city of Coronado in San Diego, where he also works as a U.S. history and American government teacher at Coronado High School. Casey and I are old friends. Casey, it's good to see you. How are you holding up?
I'm doing well, Ted. It's great to see you again, and I'm excited to join you today.
Thank you for being here. Well, let's get to it. Look, we're friends. So I'm going to air out some concerns and then ask you a few questions. I think you're uniquely positioned to comment on them. January 6th was an inflection point for many of us. Seeing the invasion of the US Capitol on January 6th, where the former president's supporters, Mr. Trump's supporters, sought to pressure Mike Pence and the US Senate to overturn the presidential election results was shocking. And, like many, I asked myself, how in the hell did this happen? We know that Trump called for his supporters to come to Washington on January 6th, and that he incited many of those present to storm the Capitol. Yet it bears asking, why did those people think that Pence or the Senate could change the results or would change the election results? And, an elementary understanding of our system of government would show that changing the election results was simply not in the vice president's power, nor in the Senate's power. And, beyond this, a basic understanding of American society would show that, that type of behavior, it's not popular with the majority of the American public. It strikes at our democratic traditions, and we're a society that operates according to the rule of law. Now, I understand that millions of Americans were fed a steady stream of misinformation leading up to the November 3 election, as well as afterwards, with the dishonest assertions that the election was determined by fraud, and that Joe Biden wanted to destroy America, and that he wanted to damage Christianity, etc. And this, lying to the American people certainly led to the radicalization that contributed to the January 6th riot. If you listen to what those at the Capitol Hill riot said, many of them believe that they are in a dangerous situation in life, and that those things that they want to protect, whether it was President Trump's presidency, Second Amendment rights, Christianity, those were being threatened. Those were being taken away from them by someone who didn't deserve it. And many in that riot believed that they were facing an existential threat, that their way of life is going away, that they had a patriotic duty to fight against these threats, and that they were entitled to have their leader installed as president. These concerns, they had apocalyptic tones to them. And when you combine that with a sustained disinformation campaign, it led to that awful situation. And I understand why they like Mr. Trump. His style was different. He did what he could to shake up Washington, and he's mesmerizing. To his credit, Trump in some ways was a consequential president. However, leading up to the election and afterwards, he said things that simply were untrue about the election results. He fed his supporters with conspiracy theories, and that resonated with people, and some of them took that to be a call to action. And as you know, Mr. Tanaka, one of the results of those lies are reflected in polls. Polls show that half of Republicans believe that Trump lost to Biden over issues of election fraud. And however persuasive leaders may be, citizens of democratic societies need to also have the ability to think for themselves. They need to have the ability and willingness to tell the difference between myths, truths, and facts. And all this leads me to think, Casey, that perhaps part of the cause of this difficult situation we find ourselves in is that too many of us have a deficit of understanding of basic American civics and history. When you are not grounded in your own history, you are rudderless and susceptible to being misled and to being taken. And you know very well, Casey, democracy is a tough business. It's not easy. Members, citizens of democratic societies, they need to be informed. They should be able to distinguish between fictitious narratives and the realities of politics and election outcomes. So, Casey, you're an educator and you're also an elected official. So, putting on both of those hats, your educator cap and your city council member cap, a few questions. How can we help people learn about American government more effectively? How can we help folks think for themselves, not just accept as fact everything that they see in their preferred narrow social media outlets? In other words, how can we help people be less susceptible to conspiracy theories and to become more discerning citizens regardless of their political leanings?
All right, so while you were talking, I was taking some notes, some things that you were bringing to mind for me. And the first one, I think a little idea that popped in my head is that I think a lot of people have blurred the line between what is a fact and what is an opinion. And, I think a lot of how you described that mob that descended on the Capitol on January 6th, I think a lot of those people have reached a point where their opinions have become facts. And it doesn't matter how many times anyone tries to tell them point by point, systematically, what things concretely aren't true versus what things, there's a logic gap. I think a lot of those people don't want to hear it, and that's why they showed up at the Capitol. They're tired of people telling them what to think, what are facts. They feel like they're smart enough to know the difference or to know if it matters. And a lot of these things keep coming down to what are my rights, which again leads to your point about where can you find the education about what your rights really are. But I think there are some profound gray areas where, again, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. And I can completely think your opinion's wrong, but it doesn't mean you're not living in somewhere that's real in terms of government. But I think one of the real disconnects we're having in our political environment is that we can't get opposing groups, whether they're Democrat or Republican, Tea Party and moderate, whatever the factions may be, and they obviously don't have to be limited to two, we can't get them to agree on a basic set of facts. It's sort of like that famous Daniel Patrick Moynihan quote that, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own set of facts. So I think that's one real problem, that there is no answer to your question. How do we educate people? Well, if I don't want to be educated, if my premise is I am well educated and you're wrong. I mean, a lot of the political dialogue keeps deadlocking or going nowhere based on those really self-satisfied points of view that I'm already there. I'm already enlightened. I'm right and you're wrong. So that's one concern I think we need to talk about more. Another concern I have is just tribalism. I'm a big San Diego Padre fan. And that means that if you are an LA Dodger fan, I don't like you. Even if I like you, I don't. And even if you tell me how good your team is, how you won the World Series last year, and Clayton Kershaw this, Kenley Jansen that, I just know you're wrong. And yeah, I can joke about that. And that's the beauty of sports. And that's why we call ourselves sports fanatics. We're admitting we're fanatical. We're admitting we're being emotional rather than logical. And screw you if you don't like it. And obviously people can take their pastimes too far, but sports are generally fun. The bad news, I would say, about American culture right now is that we're taking that same type of behavior and applying it to if you're a Democrat or a Republican, which goes again to this blurring of fact and opinion. If you are so tribal that you equate a certain amount of loyalty, patriotism, being right and being wrong to which political party you are, all of our academic talks aren't going to have any difference. And it doesn't matter what I teach a kid in 12th grade. If you keep subscribing to your tribalism, my party is always right. Yours is always wrong. Even if I know you're right, you're still wrong because you're one of them. And you guys are immoral. You're a bunch of liberals. You're a bunch of Tea Parties. Whatever, it keeps defaulting back to that really simplistic black and white, binary, loyalty-based, I love my side and you guys are a bunch of traitors. So again, facts versus opinions, tribalism. And then your question comes back to like, well, how do we help these people, or what can we do differently? And I guess my ultimate answer to you is that those people have to want to meet you halfway. You know, you can't fix a problem if someone doesn't first admit they have a problem. Rehab isn't going to fix your alcoholism problem or your drug problem if you don't first say you have a problem. So I have bad news for you. There isn't an obvious or clear fix to these things because these people do not perceive that they have a problem and they don't want to be fixed. And as far as what I can teach a 12th grader, I can do my greatest good if I have a student who meets me halfway. If they are, you know, a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, I don't know, but if they can at least, you know, enter a classroom with a little bit of the premise, there's more I could learn, there's more I need to know, then we can start to have interesting discussions about what does the Constitution say, you know, what's the Republican solution sound like, the Democrat, what are the flaws in each? That's why I love teaching, because I get to do that stuff all the time, because I try to make it clear what the difference is between fact and opinion. Obviously, teachers are expected, don't, you know, if you're part of a tribe, keep that out of your classroom. I'm happy to do that. But, you know, most of the problems we're seeing, can you imagine any of those people in that mob, like just stopping for a second and having a thoughtful discussion? I mean, I watched the same footage that most people did. And, you know, every time a news camera came by, they were yelling fake news at whoever the person was. They were there. I mean, they were there for all the wrong reasons. And so that was what I found terrifying. I didn't find most of the stuff I saw surprising. President Trump telegraphed that play, that if we can't win this one way, we'll win it a different way. And he made it clear, I want a bunch of you to show up on January 6th. He didn't say January 3rd or December. He picked that day because that's the day the Electoral College votes are being counted. And he was trying to, you know, get a mob together to intimidate the people who are supposed to count those votes, to maybe invent, you know, option A, option B, invent option C. You know, I mean, I think all of that was deliberate. The only thing that should have surprised any of us was how successful that mob was at getting into the Capitol. You know, but again, there isn't much dispute that they were a mob. They were not a well-behaved group of people. They didn't seem to be there because they wanted to sing songs. I mean, they were there to intimidate. How they were going to intimidate, what intimidate means, had some variation amongst the members of that group, but their behavior isn't surprising. Why they showed up isn't surprising. That the president gave them a pep rally isn't surprising. All of that stuff, it's consistent with national behavior, you know, for at least the last 4 years in terms of the dichotomy between Trump supporters and Trump opposers and so on. So, you know, I think the real conundrum is, how do you get people to want to change?
Would it be helpful to teach kids courses in how to spot inaccurate information in the digital sphere, or am I just missing the point?
Well, I think most history teachers that you talk to would tell you that the various things that you're taught in, you know, your teacher credential programs, teacher training, you know, as a history teacher, that you're supposed to talk about what's the difference between primary evidence, secondary evidence, what's the difference between facts and opinions, how do you rate the source, what does bias look like? All of these things are taught, which again comes back to, for learning to work, I have to meet the student halfway and the student has to meet me halfway. You know, you have to identify that there are areas that you could achieve some growth in, and then you have to identify if this teacher sitting in front of me is someone that can help me get there. I think these things are all taught. You know, I mean, our schools haven't been in existence for years or decades. Our schools have been in existence for centuries. And certainly what we teach, how we teach it evolves. But the study of history, I mean, the pedagogy has been there for decades. So I really don't think it's a matter of we're not teaching the right stuff the right way. Certainly, I'm not proposing that we can't do better and reflect, but I don't really think that a lot of people like to make that argument that, you know, if we only taught civics, we teach it. I've had school board members tell me that. I've had judges. There's a whole group of California judges that think we don't teach civics because criminals keep showing up in their courtrooms. I've had to tell my own school board members, your kid was in my government class. We just call it government, not civics. We teach it. It's a semester requirement, and we keep defaulting to this. If we would just teach them better, but there's so much more to this problem in our political world than whether or not we're teaching these things in school.
Yeah. So, as an elected official, what thoughts do you have as to measures that can be taken to fight disinformation?
Well, one of the things that is in my government textbook is that there are different types of elected official. That one type of elected official is a delegate, and there's no set way to do this. That's why the textbook covers this. But the delegate theory is that when you win an election, your perception of your job as an elected official is to represent the views of your constituents. That you're their delegate. You are supposed to vote the way they would vote if they could. And in a republic, you elect one of me, and then 10,000 you can stay at home and go work on something else. Another form, forgetting the term the textbook uses, is that a trustee form. The idea that I have constituents, but you've elected me to use my best judgment, and if I think that the most honest, correct thing to do is A, but I know that a majority of you want B, the trustee delegate votes for A anyway and accepts that if you have to vote me out of office, that's your right, but I took an oath to do the right thing. And even though I'm pretty sure a majority of you want me to do one thing, I'm going to do the other because it's the right thing to do. And then the third type of elected official is called a politico, someone that alternates between the two. So I would argue to you that the best elected officials are the ones that alternate between the two. And then your job as an elected official is always to be communicating with your constituents. In other words, you have to weigh out. There's no perfect way to make decisions. You have to just make judgment calls, value decisions of what was more important. If I know my constituents want me to take this action, then do I take the action? Or are they asking me to do something illegal? Or are they asking me to do something that I actually am smarter than you on this? You've elected me to get really smart on the issues, and no offense, constituency, but you guys got this one wrong. So those are the things that the average elected official has to grapple with. Are you more their delegate? Are you more a trustee just elected to do the right thing? And sorry guys, if you don't agree, fire me if you don't like it. Or the most evolved one that you're going to have to keep alternating between the two. I'll give you an example. Doug Jones, until recently was a senator from Alabama. And he basically only won his Senate seat in a special election, like in a shortened, because the Republican Party nominated their worst candidate. And a number of Republicans decided, I guess I either have no choice but to not vote or to vote for Doug Jones, even though I don't want to. And when Tommy Tuberville went up against Doug Jones, Tommy Tuberville cleaned his clock because Alabama's a red state. I'm sure there were many times where Doug Jones had to weigh that out. He knows, and he's a smart, ethical guy. He's a former prosecutor. He knows his constituents, want him to vote for Trump nominees and things like that. But he's a Democrat, and he didn't run for this Senate by saying, well, even though the Democrats stand for all these things, I'm just going to blow it off. And I mean, that's a tough job. And I don't think many observers were surprised that Doug Jones wasn't reelected. He wasn't reelected because, again, his views didn't match his constituents. But to his credit, I would say he was more of a trustee, that he was elected to the Senate for 2 years, and he took votes that he thought were the right thing for his state, even if his constituents didn't agree with him. And they didn't. That's why they voted for a guy with no political experience and has just, from time to time, been able to beat the University of Alabama.
So yesterday, Joe Biden was sworn in as our 46th president. As an educator, as a public official, what are your expectations of the new administration?
Well, something that I think is interesting about Joe Biden that should be obvious to anyone who likes him, dislikes him, if they've been paying attention, he's been around a long time. And I think that his political reputation is built around this idea that he's a pretty straight shooter when it comes to dealing with people and making political deals, political decisions. And again, I think that the the liberals of the Democratic Party have never been that excited about the idea of a President Joe Biden. You know, if you think about the squad, people like AOC, you know, she endorsed Bernie Sanders. She didn't, you know, endorse Biden necessarily. Though once Biden was the nominee, like any other Democrat, she tucked in behind him. I think Biden's strength is, again, that he's a moderate, and he has already been able to broker some deals with Republicans. He ran for president under this premise that, you know, if you elected him, he'd be able to do that again. I think also, if you analyze the people that Joe Biden's nominated to be in his cabinet, I think sometimes people who run for president, in order to get rid of a couple of the competitors in their own party, they have to promise cabinet positions in order to get so-and-so to drop out of the race. Personally, and I am a Democrat, but I'm never excited with when people get nominated to the cabinet who have no business running an executive branch department, but they get to anyway, because, you know, we made this deal. I dropped out, and then, you know, you agreed to make me the Secretary of, you know, Commerce or something. So I think if you analyze the people that Biden selected, like who's his Treasury Secretary, someone eminently qualified in the world of finance, the former Fed chair. The one person who's been confirmed by the Senate, his Director for National Intelligence, someone with, you know, a deep background in the CIA. Who's his nominee at Defense? A well-regarded former four-star general. You know, Secretary of State, someone with a clear foreign service background. So to me, that's what you should look at now to get a sense of what will Biden be like as a president for at least the next 1 or 2 years. Again, I think he's going to try to run down the moderate middle line as much as he can. That's his best way to be able to draw people like Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski or Mitt Romney to, you know, meet him halfway and say, fine, I'll work with you on these things. I think that's what his track record has been for decades. So I have seen nothing to dissuade me from that's going to be kind of his recipe for how to move forward as a president. I think he's going to keep trying to honestly meet people halfway. And if anything, I think the group that is maybe most likely to get mad at Biden will be his own liberal wing, you know, because what makes them liberals is that they want to pursue some fairly dramatic policy changes. And that's one thing I don't associate with Joe Biden are big policy changes. I think he'll support some of them, but like any moderate, I think he's going to be very strategic about which ones. Like he's talked about COVID, he's talked about some of the green energy things, but I don't think he's going to, you know, be it, you know, an AOC-like Democrat and pursue all of these things all over the board. And I don't think he's going to be strident about it.
If he asked you for one piece of advice, what would you share with him?
I wouldn't give him any advice. I know my limitations. I have never served in federal government. I have never worked for a member of. I'm just a guy who works in a classroom and in a city. If he asked me for advice about Coronado, I'd be happy to give him advice. But
Please, yeah. I mean,
I think it would be a mistake for me to give President Biden any advice.
Okay. What about Coronado? Can you share something about advice you'd give regarding Coronado? I mean, Coronado is not an inconsequential place. It's a military town and has interest.
Well, you know, I think maybe, okay, in that context, the advice I would give not just President Biden, but any higher up is to decentralize as much as you can. That I think most of the policy decisions that end up being mistakes are when a higher level of government tries to set a rule that every other lower government under it has to meet under penalty of breaking the law. You know, the one size fits all, you know, and I hate that cliche, but that is a problem as I see it, that the areas, so the beauty of living in Coronado is if you had a real problem with something in Coronado and you emailed me, I would respond to your email personally. I would respond to that email within the day, and if I had the chance, within the hour. That's not because I'm exceptional. That's because I have to answer your email at some point. I may as well do it now. And what is sincere is I'm happy to help. Or I'm happy to tell you in the email, I don't know that I can help, but that's my job. I like to tell people that if you, Todd Gloria is the mayor of San Diego, a city where he probably has over 1 million constituents. I can confidently tell you, if you email Todd Gloria today, you will not hear from him directly. If you hear from anyone, will hear from a staffer. And the only way for your email to reach Todd Gloria's eyes will be for it to get through some kind of a screening process where they say, Mayor Gloria, you need to read this. So every level you get up that's higher, you get further removed from the democratic process. So my concern is when people who really know nothing about Coronado make a rule and tell us to go pound sand, whether we like it or not. You know, a person, here's reality. If Coronado had a problem, I wouldn't be able to meet with Joe Biden. When I was the mayor of Coronado for 8 years, the biggest official that took a meeting with me was the number 2 person at the Secretary of the Navy at the time. That was nice. I mean, it was nice. It was Robert Work, and he went on to be the Undersecretary for Defense, and he very politely listened to what I had to say and the city manager had to say for an hour, and then he took no action on anything I asked for. And that's government for you. I'm not upset. At least I had a chance to say my piece, and things went on in spite of what I had to say. But that's my problem with government, is usually the higher the rank, the more they like how they're wearing 4 stars, and you're going to take the decision and go away now. So there's a line in The West Wing when Martin Sheen's character, President Bartlett, uses the 25th Amendment to step away from the job, and his chief of staff, Leo McGarry, says, a lot of times this office is about what it doesn't do. And that's something I think people don't understand about the power of government. The power exists when it's needed to be used, but a lot of times the powers we invest in government should not be used. So I guess that's the advice I would give.
How's your job changed since COVID? Not as an educator, but in your role on the council?
Well, so term limits were why I left office as mayor of Coronado in 2016. So I've been out of government for 4 years, and I rejoined the council here 4 years later. I think most of the job is the same. I mean, the only changes with COVID, obviously a lot of people want to meet with you or talk with you about something. And so I'm more careful about how I meet. I don't take meetings indoors as much as possible. Certainly, if I can have a meeting, by phone or by video, people are happy to do that typically. But the job's the same. My job is to understand how the bureaucracy of the city of Coronado works, where everything's located. And I tell people that many times your job as mayor or council member is to be an informational kiosk. People want to meet with you. I hear what they have to say. And then usually my job at the end of the meeting is to connect them with the person they should have met with. In other words, if you think about, most organizations have a board, and then you hire a CEO, and the CEO runs the company. Cities are the same. You have a board, a city council. Instead of the chairman of the board, you have a mayor. But the mayor doesn't run the city. You hire a city manager. The city manager runs the city. So a lot of the times when people are like, I want to see the mayor, you're my boss. I'm happy to see you. And at the end of the meeting, I politely explain who you should have met with. And I don't ever use the term you should have. I just politely point out that, the police chief is in charge of this, or that's a sewer issue. So would you be interested in emailing the director of engineering and public works? And, so a lot of times that's what you do. You hear what someone's saying, and then you connect them to the right department, the right place. Or the worst thing that happens is you completely understand what they're saying, and you have to explain to them why I can't help you. Either there is no obvious solution, we're deadlocked, we're the wrong layer of government. You actually should be, meeting with the county or the state. A lot of problems are somewhat insoluble. And so really all you're doing is being a therapist, hearing it, talking, helping them reflect as much as you can. But, it's not uncommon for there to not be a direct solution to their problem.
Casey, what books are you currently reading?
I had someone, I had a friend, a classmate who is also the parent of a couple of kids that I've taught, recommend a book called American Dirt. And that is about a family in Mexico that is having problems with the drug cartels, and on a dime has to end their life in Mexico, in Acapulco, and just move to America to escape the threat of death from a drug cartel. I regret I've only read 20 or 40 pages, so I can't tell you more than that, but it's pretty interesting so far. I guess my regrettable answer to you, Ted, is I don't do a lot of reading of books. The stuff that I have to do as a high school teacher, I do a lot of reading like that. I do a lot of reading, in terms of internet things, Facebook things. So I feel like maybe I'm kind of always briefing myself on things, but in terms of actually reading a book cover to cover that has 300 pages, I have to say, who has time for that? I rarely make time for that sort of thing. I guess I would also hate to admit that, when I have some free time, I would rather just watch TV probably.
So lastly, after COVID subsides a bit, once we get our arms around this terrible tragedy, people will start traveling again. They're going to come to Coronado. What places do you recommend they go to get a good meal with the prayer that they'll still be in business? Can you recommend a good restaurant or two for folks who are unfamiliar with Coronado?
Well, unfortunately, the restaurant I would have recommended did close down at the beginning of the pandemic. I guess a couple of restaurants I would recommend. A lot of people like a place called Little Frenchy. So it's French food, but it's a little bit more accessible. It's not the type of place you need to wear a coat and tie. You can get in and out and be wearing, shorts and a Hawaiian shirt or something like that. The same person who owns and operates Little Frenchy, that's only a couple blocks from the Hotel Del, also owns a place across the street called Leroy's. Their burger is rather famous. Their truffle fries are pretty good. I guess those would be two restaurants I would probably recommend to them.
Great.
But if you don't visit the Hotel Del, you're making a mistake if you've never been to Coronado. It's a Victorian hotel that was built in the 1880s. The whole city exists because the people who moved from Chicago to Coronado, before there ever was a Coronado, they went there to improve their health. They're escaping bad weather. They also went to hunt some rabbits and stuff. And then they liked this little undeveloped peninsula so much that it dawned on them maybe they should build some kind of a resort to attract other East Coasters who are trying to escape bad weather in the winters and so on. And so they did this in the 1880s. And in order to make this project work, they bought this whole peninsula that Coronado sits on, that is Coronado today. And they had to, they planned out the whole city. So Coronado is a planned city. It wasn't something that just sprouted out incrementally. The people who wanted to build this Victorian all-wood resort hotel bought the whole area of land that the hotel would sit on. They gridded the whole thing out as a city, and they needed to sell enough plots on this gridded out city to raise about $180,000 in the 1880s. And they hit their number. I don't know that they exceeded it a lot, but they hit the fundraising goal, their GoFundMe amount, and they had enough money to then build their hotel. So that's the thing that I want someone to get, to take away from Coronado when they leave, that, it's pretty remarkable that a couple people from Chicago had that vision, didn't give up on it, and it succeeded to the point that this is still a world-class resort. There aren't many Victorian hotels you can still visit of this grandeur and magnitude, and that whole city that they gridded out in order to finance that hotel, it's all right where they left it. So that's what I would hope people would discover about Coronado.
For those tourists who need a hit of caffeine, can you recommend a cafe or two?
Sure. Well, this is not going to excite anyone. I would certainly recommend the Starbucks. That's in town. I mean, they're pretty good. There is a bookstore that's called Bay Books that's not too far from that Starbucks, and it's both a bookstore and it has a cafe. And then next to that is a little poke place if you want to get some seafood. So that's a little area that is a nice place to sit down and unwind. On the other end of town, where you're all along San Diego Bay and looking at downtown San Diego, if you go a little bit towards your left, there's a little area called the Ferry Landing. There's a locally owned little coffee cart in there attached to a little barbecue restaurant. That would be another spot to stop into. There's a little Mexican restaurant there called Costa Azul that has some of the best views and pretty decent food. That's another spot. I guess those would be the recommendations I would give in that regard.
Well, just as full disclosure to our audience, I grew up in Coronado, but every time I return to Coronado, I just plant myself at Miguel's. So I know nothing about each of these places you just mentioned. So I'm glad,
Really?
yeah, I'm glad you just shared that.
Well,
Casey,
right near Miguel's, there's a guy that's trying to do tours of Coronado, but he also is selling donuts. So the next time you're at Miguel's,
hey,
just walk a couple feet away, you'll be able to get some donuts now.
excellent. All right, good to know. Casey, thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate you addressing these issues with us. It's great to see you. Please stay safe, huh?
Well, Ted, it's good to see you again. You need to come to Coronado more often.
Okay, will do.